If you believe these stories must be remembered, subscribe to Echoes of Valor and help keep history alive.
The morning sun barely touched the horizon as the Bismarck lay moored in the harbor of Gotenhafen. A pale gray mist clung to the water, drifting across the steel behemoth like a shroud. To the men on board, the battleship was more than a machine. It was a fortress, a symbol of German naval power, and an instrument of both fear and fascination. From the bridge, Captain Ernst Lindemann surveyed the decks, his gaze tracing the massive gun turrets that loomed like dark sentinels. Each 38-centimeter cannon was meticulously polished, their barrels gleaming faintly in the muted light, a testament to the pride and precision of the Kriegsmarine. Below deck, the crew moved with the rhythmic efficiency of a well-oiled mechanism. Sailors checked the machinery, engineers inspected the boilers, and gunners ran final drills on the gun turrets. There was a palpable sense of anticipation. The Bismarck was preparing to leave port, and with that departure, a shadow of destiny would stretch across the Atlantic. For the men on board, every bolt tightened, every valve tested, was an act of ritual and acknowledgement of the immense responsibility resting on their shoulders. The ship itself was a marvel of modern engineering. At over 50,000 tons fully loaded, she was the largest battleship Germany had ever built. Her armor belt was nearly 320 millimeters thick, capable of withstanding shells that would obliterate smaller vessels. The main battery, 8 38-centimeter guns housed in 4 twin turrets, could unleash a broadside that rivaled anything afloat. And yet, for all her power, the Bismarck was not invincible. Subtle cracks in her systems, vulnerabilities in design, and the ever-present threat of air reconnaissance loomed over every officer and sailor. On the bridge, Lindemann reviewed the route to the open Atlantic. Intelligence reports indicated that British naval forces were aware of a German surface raider operating in the North Atlantic. The mission was simple in its strategic aim, but perilous in execution. Break into the Atlantic, raid Allied shipping, and return with minimal engagement from superior enemy forces. For the men below, the abstract language of strategy translated into hours of watch duty, drills, and the nervous anticipation of the first shot fired. The Bismarck's crew were veterans of a navy that had once dominated the seas, but the shadow of 1940's rapid defeats in the Atlantic still lingered, and prudence tempered their pride. The early hours were filled with the quiet tension of a ship on the brink. Sailors leaned against railings, watching the harbor fade into fog. Engineers adjusted the throttles, listening to the mechanical heartbeat of the ship. Gunners ran through the manual drills of loading shells, calibrating rangefinders, and testing communications between turret and bridge. Each crew member understood the stakes. This was not a simple voyage. It was a gamble of strategy and courage against an unseen, yet formidable enemy. As the Bismarck's engines hummed to life, the vibration traveled through the decks, a low rumble that resonated in the chests of those on board. It was a reminder of the ship's immense power and simultaneously its fragility. Lindemann gave the order to leave the harbor, and slowly the Bismarck began her journey toward the open Atlantic fog, and mist rolled past the bow, and the silhouette of the harbor disappeared, leaving the ship in a gray expanse that seemed both infinite and isolating. On deck, young sailors felt a mixture of awe and fear. The enormity of the vessel, the sheer complexity of her systems, and the anticipation of battle created a psychological weight that each man carried differently. Some steeled themselves with discipline. Others whispered prayers. The Bismarck was more than a ship. It was a symbol of German ambition, a leviathan whose shadow would stretch across the seas. But as the harbor fell behind, the sailors could not yet know that this giant, for all her strength, was about to be tested in a way no training could fully prepare them for. From above, the camera of history would later see a sleek, powerful battleship gliding through misty waters, a floating fortress carrying pride, technology, and men who believed in their mission. Below the deck, every valve, lever, and shell was part of a careful orchestration, a ritual performed in preparation for a war that would soon engulf the Atlantic in fire and steel. The Bismarck was awakening, not just as a ship, but as a force that would leave an indelible mark on naval history. By the evening of May 21, 1941, Bismarck had slipped past the protective screen of the German fleet into the gray expanse of the North Atlantic. The sea tossed the mighty ship, reminding her crew that the ocean, not steel, ruled. Captain Ernst Lindemann stood on the bridge, scanning the horizon. Every hour brought them closer to confrontation with an enemy already aware of their movements. Though Bismarck was a technological marvel, the Atlantic could render even the strongest vessel vulnerable. Bismarck's mission was clear: break into the Atlantic, disrupt Allied shipping, and demonstrate Germany's reach. But the British Admiralty was already mobilizing. Reports of a German battleship had reached London, prompting the deployment of HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales, a formidable pair meant to confront any surface threat. On the morning of May 24th, Bismarck was spotted off Iceland. Lindemann and his officers understood the risks. They were outnumbered, and British firepower was substantial. Radar blips and distant smoke plumes became sources of anxiety. Sailors checked guns, plotted course changes, and monitored engines. Tension coiled tightly, a silent drumbeat of anticipation. At 5:35, HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales closed in. The North Atlantic seemed to contract as two colossal fleets converged. Lindemann issued orders to prepare for engagement. Main battery turrets slowly turned, training massive barrels toward the approaching British ships. Rangefinders clicked, gunners braced, engineers fed fuel into boilers, ensuring top speed. Every man understood the gravity. This battle would be remembered. The initial salvo was thunderous. HMS Hood sent shells toward Bismarck, each a deadly messenger. Bismarck responded, shaking decks and sending tremors through. Steel and bone explosions erupted between the ships, towering plumes marking the deadly paths of shells. The roar of artillery was deafening, punctuated by alarms, shouted commands, and the metallic echo of ordnance movement. Sailors, drenched in sweat and seawater, moved as one organism, driven by training and instinct. Tragedy struck the Royal Navy. A well-aimed salvo from Bismarck hit HMS Hood. The deck erupted in a cataclysmic explosion. Hood disintegrated in seconds. Only 3 sailors survived from a crew of 1,418. For Bismarck's men, the sight was horrifying and awe-inspiring, a reminder of the destructive power contained within their ship. HMS Prince of Wales retreated, damaged but afloat. The tactical victory was immediate, but British forces now knew Bismarck's location. The Admiralty ordered relentless pursuit, mobilizing cruisers, destroyers, and aircraft carriers. Aircraft from Ark Royal began sorties to track and harass Bismarck, dropping reports and torpedoes to slow her advance. The Atlantic, once a playground, became a corridor of danger. The crew felt the pressure. Hours of vigilance became days. Engineers worked tirelessly to maintain maximum speed. Gunners recalibrated constantly. Lindemann's calm authority was a lifeline. Officers relayed orders with precision, maintaining discipline amid tension. The battle had not ended. It had shifted to a deadly pursuit, with Bismarck navigating both ocean and strategy, aware that the Royal Navy would not relent. As night fell, Bismarck steamed into darkness, waves crashing against her hull. Radar and lookouts scanning tirelessly. The ship had survived the first engagement, but the chase was relentless. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, gray and treacherous, a stage for the drama unfolding. Survival depended not only on steel and firepower, but on cunning, discipline, and fortune. The chase had begun, and the North Atlantic would soon witness a pursuit unparalleled in naval history.
The morning of May 25th dawned cold and gray over the North Atlantic. Bismarck had survived her first confrontation, but the hunter had now become the hunted. British forces were relentless, and the Admiralty's eyes were everywhere. Air reconnaissance from the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal had located the massive German battleship, and the Royal Navy's plan was precise: slow her down, prevent her escape, and prepare for a final engagement. At 10 a.m., swordfish biplanes, slow, vulnerable, yet deceptively effective, launched from Ark Royal. Their task: strike Bismarck with torpedoes. The crew on Bismarck scanned the skies, seeing the tiny silhouettes approach through binoculars. The first wave of aircraft, frail against the armored behemoth, descended, their engines whining against the wind. Sailors loaded the anti-aircraft guns, hearts hammering as the fragile planes dove into the path of certain death. Captain Lindemann stood on the bridge, calm and resolute. Every officer understood the risk. The crew had trained for naval engagements, for the thunder of main guns and the rattle of secondary batteries, but the vulnerability to air attack was a different calculus. Bismarck's anti-aircraft batteries roared to life, streams of fire tracing the incoming swordfish, shells screaming toward the sky. Explosions erupted near the wings, tearing aircraft apart in mid-flight. Yet the waves of attack kept coming. At 10:20, the critical hit occurred. A torpedo struck Bismarck amidships, ripping through the hull below the waterline. Water surged into the compartments. Engineers fought to contain flooding, and the ship listed slightly under the unexpected strike. Panic did not take hold. Training and discipline dictated action. Pumps were activated. Damage control parties rushed to shoring and watertight doors, and officers coordinated a response that exemplified Kriegsmarine efficiency. Yet, beneath the calm, fear and the knowledge of vulnerability simmered. The torpedo strike had accomplished its strategic goal. Bismarck's speed was reduced. No longer could she easily outmaneuver the pursuing fleet. British Admiralty officers in London, monitoring the reports from Ark Royal, now saw a golden opportunity. The once formidable battleship was becoming a target that could be boxed in. Naval intelligence plotted interception points, while ships like HMS Norfolk, Suffolk, and King George V were ordered to close in from multiple directions. Meanwhile, the North Atlantic's weather remained merciless. Rain and fog concealed movements, yet also complicated Bismarck's ability to evade detection. Sailors worked under the constant threat of gunfire, torpedoes, and the ocean itself. Every lookout post scanned for smoke. Every sonar ping analyzed. Bismarck, the pride of the Kriegsmarine, became a symbol of both human ingenuity and the raw danger of modern warfare. By the afternoon, British forces had established a partial blockade. Cruisers shadowed Bismarck at a distance, their 8-inch guns occasionally exchanging fire with her secondary batteries. Aircraft continued harassment, launching additional torpedoes and dropping reconnaissance reports to refine interception courses. The ship's main guns, capable of immense destruction, were ready. Yet their effectiveness was now tempered by the necessity to conserve ammunition for the inevitable decisive encounter. Captain Lindemann and Admiral Lutyens convened on the bridge. Options were weighed with meticulous care. Return to France for repairs meant running through the British blockade, a risky endeavor. Continuing into the Atlantic offered a chance to reach safety in occupied ports, but also prolonged exposure to relentless pursuit. The choice was perilous in every direction, a testament to the strategic pressure imposed by the British naval machine. Night fell, and Bismarck moved through dark waters, torpedoes and gunfire in her wake. The crew slept only in shifts, their rest punctuated by alarms, vibrations, and the constant hum of engines. Every hour was a test of endurance, every decision carrying the weight of survival. By May 26th, it was clear that the initial engagement with HMS Hood and Prince of Wales had set in motion a chain of events from which there was no escape. Bismarck's fate was no longer solely in her captain's hands. It rested in the calculations of an entire navy, in the coordination of air and sea power, and in the unforgiving expanse of the Atlantic itself. The torpedo from Ark Royal had changed everything. Bismarck was no longer an invincible force. It was a wounded giant, hunted by one of the most sophisticated naval operations in history. The stage was set for the final confrontation, where steel, strategy, and courage would collide in a deadly ballet. The Atlantic, ever indifferent, waited.
The dawn of May 27th, 1941, broke with a heavy, cold mist. The Atlantic was calm, but tension crackled through the air like static. Bismarck, crippled by the torpedo that jammed her rudder, could no longer maneuver. She was a drifting fortress, powerful, yet helpless. Around her, the hunters closed in. The British fleet, led by HMS King George V and HMS Rodney, had finally found their prey. At 8:45 a.m., radar contact was confirmed. The order was given: open fire. The silence of the ocean shattered as the first 16-inch shells roared through the mist. The British guns spoke in thunder. Bismarck's crew braced for impact. The first salvos fell short, plumes of water towering beside the hull. Then came the hits. The German battleship responded, her 15-inch guns booming in defiance. Each shot a symbol of determination and pride. The sea erupted in flame and smoke. Massive shells tore through the air, the sound echoing for miles. On Bismarck's bridge, Captain Lindemann gave calm, measured orders despite the chaos around him. Admiral Lütjens stood silently, watching the destruction unfold. Communications flickered, instruments shattered, yet the crew continued their duties with mechanical precision. They knew the end was near, but no one abandoned their post.
The British gunners adjusted their range. Rodney's shells smashed into Bismarck's superstructure, tearing apart turrets, fire control systems, and antennae. One by one, the German guns fell silent. The once mighty ship was turning into a burning hulk, her decks ablaze, her sides riddled with holes. Still, her flag flew proudly, unyielding amid the inferno. Below deck, damage control teams worked in darkness and smoke. Fires raged uncontrollably, compartments flooded, and men suffocated from lack of air. The roar of explosions mixed with the cries of the wounded. Yet discipline held. They were Kriegsmarine sailors, trained to fight until the very end. Even as ammunition stores ignited, they kept the pumps running and manned what remained of the guns.
By 9:15, the battle had become a massacre. Bismarck's guns could no longer aim properly. Her hull was pounded relentlessly by thousands of tons of British firepower. The ship was dying, but her crew refused to surrender. Messages intercepted by the Royal Navy reported only one word: fighting to the last shell. At 10 a.m., the order came from within: scuttle the ship. The engineers opened the flood valves, and demolition charges were set. It was an act of defiance,
a decision to die on their own terms rather than let the enemy claim their ship. As British shells continued to hammer the lifeless giant, Bismarck began to list heavily to port. Smoke billowed high into the sky, her mighty hull glowing red beneath the flames.
By 10:40, it was over. The Atlantic swallowed her whole. The pride of the German fleet slipped beneath the waves, leaving only wreckage and oil slicks on the surface. Out of a crew of over 2,200, only 114 survived, plucked from the freezing waters by British destroyers and a German U-boat that arrived too late to save the rest. As the last echoes of gunfire faded, the British commanders stood in silence. There was no celebration, no triumph, only the grim understanding of what it had taken to bring down one ship. HMS Rodney's captain would later write, "It was like executing a wounded lion."
In Berlin, the news hit like a thunderclap. The Bismarck, symbol of naval pride, of Germany's ambitions at sea, was gone. Yet her legacy had already been written in steel and blood. The ship's final battle was not a story of defeat, but of unyielding resolve. Against impossible odds, she had fought to the end, and in doing so became immortal. The sea was calm again. The smoke drifted away, the waves erased the scars of battle, and silence returned to the North Atlantic. But beneath the waves, at a depth of nearly 4,800 meters, the Bismarck rested, alone, proud, undefeated in spirit.
The Atlantic holds its secrets well. For nearly half a century, the wreck of the Bismarck lay undisturbed in the cold darkness 4 kilometers beneath the waves, a ghost preserved in silence. Above the surface, the world changed. The war ended, nations rebuilt, and memories faded into history books. But the story of the Bismarck never truly sank. It became legend, a tale of power, pride, and tragedy that still resonates across generations. When the battleship sailed in May 1941, she carried more than steel and ammunition. She carried the hopes of a nation desperate to challenge the naval supremacy of the British Empire. Her design was unmatched, her armor impenetrable, her guns devastating. To many Germans, she was proof that their navy could once again rule the seas. To the Allies, she was a monster that had to be destroyed at all costs.
The destruction of HMS Hood, Britain's most famous warship, only intensified that determination. The Royal Navy's pursuit of the Bismarck became personal, a hunt driven not only by strategy, but by vengeance. And when the ship finally fell, the victory came at a price measured in human lives and moral reflection. The men aboard the Bismarck, like their enemies, were sailors doing their duty. In the end, both sides were bound by the same ocean and the same fate. Decades later, in 1989, American oceanographer Robert Ballard, the man who had discovered the wreck of the Titanic, led an expedition to find the Bismarck. Using deep-sea submersibles, his team scanned the ocean floor, guided by wartime records and sonar echoes. When the cameras finally revealed the shape of the great battleship lying upright and intact on the seabed,
It was as if time itself had paused. Her hull was torn and battered, but her dignity remained untouched. The swastika that once adorned her deck was gone, erased by time and tide. But her massive guns still pointed defiantly into the dark.
For Ballard and his crew, it was not a triumph, but a moment of silence. He said later, "We weren't there to raise her, we were there to pay our respects." The images that emerged from the deep told a story not of victory or defeat, but of remembrance. The final resting place of over 2,000 men who had vanished into the sea. Historians would debate for years what the Bismarck truly represented. Was she a masterpiece of engineering or a symbol of a doomed cause? Some saw her as a testament to human ambition and courage. Others as a warning of where that ambition leads when guided by tyranny and pride. The truth lies somewhere in between, a reminder that history's greatest machines are always built and manned by people, and that war consumes them both.
In Germany, the Bismarck became a symbol of loss and reflection rather than glory. Veterans of the Kriegsmarine spoke of her not with triumph, but with quiet reverence. For the British sailors who fought against her, the memory was equally complex. Respect for the enemy's courage and sorrow for the lives lost on both sides. The Atlantic, vast and indifferent, kept their story together in its depths. Today, the name Bismarck still evokes awe. Books, films, and documentaries revisit her voyage, each one searching for meaning in the short, violent life of a ship that sailed for only 9 days. Yet her legacy endures not because of the power she wielded, but because of how she fell, surrounded, outgunned, and yet unyielding. Her destruction marked not just the end of a warship, but the end of an era. The age of the great battleships was closing, giving way to aircraft carriers, missiles, and new forms of warfare. The ocean that once echoed with the thunder of naval guns would never sound the same again.
As the years pass, divers, historians, and descendants of the crew continue to visit her grave through robotic eyes. The Bismarck rests silently, a monument to human achievement and tragedy. The currents whisper through her broken hull, carrying the echoes of her last battle. The cold Atlantic keeps its promise that those who sleep beneath will not be disturbed. In the end, the Bismarck story is not about who won or lost. It is about the cost of ambition, the fragility of glory, and the enduring dignity of those who fight and fall at sea. Her final voyage remains a chapter, not only in the history of war, but in the history of humanity's eternal struggle with itself. The ocean closes above her once more, calm and endless. Somewhere in that darkness, the Bismarck still dreams, not of conquest, but of peace.